I'm Reverend Phil, and I'm your host for Words of the Prophets. Where are our prophets now? Where are those messages God chooses to communicate divine revelation through? In the past, the Creator has sent prophets like Abraham, Siddhartha, Jesus, Muhammad, and many more. Maybe our higher power has switched tactics since we reinterpret God's words as soon as the Creator's prophets leave us. Could it be that Spirit talks to each one of us individually and we haven't learned to listen? On Words of the Prophets, our modern prophets show us how to find the internal prophet that is the I Am, and we discuss the application of spiritual principles in all aspects of our lives. Love and light, everybody. I'm Reverend Phil, and I'm your host for Words of the Prophets. Today my guest is Jonathan Cruz, who is a Vedic astrologer. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you, Phil. It's good to be here.
It's good to have you. We're going to get interesting today. We're probably going to find out more about me than you want to know, but that's me on the chart. Today's prophetic topic is the Lords of Light. And our prophetic topic is the literal definition of the Sanskrit term Jyotish, which translates into the Lords of Light. The term is a descriptor for the luminous entities in the sky said to have an influence on humanity. And we're going to expand on what that means a little bit later. But before we do that, Jonathan, tell everybody, what got you on this path to become a Vedic astrologer?
From a very early age, I sought alternative ways of spirituality, like many of us, starting with meditation in the early years. Early 70s, I started meditating, saw a huge change in myself and how I related to the world. So became a meditation instructor and actually was teaching meditation and have been teaching meditation for about 36 years.
Any particular discipline?
Started off with TM. Transcendental meditation. Mm-hmm. And then I went more deeply into it, eventually went into an Eastern style meditation focused monastery and was in that monastery for many years doing very intense meditation.
Where was it?
It was wherever we were. Sometimes it was India, sometimes here in the United States, sometimes we would travel around. Talking about the scientific benefits of meditation, lecturing on those benefits all over around the world. But very often we were in seclusion, meditating for sometimes 8 hours a day.
So the astrology kind of paralleled that, or?
Well, the Vedic astrology comes from this whole system of Vedic philosophy, Vedic knowledge, that was first written down about 5,000 years ago. The understanding was that the ancient Vedic seers, called rishis, could see the world going into a more difficult time, a more dense and what they termed ignorant time. And what we were becoming ignorant of was that vital awareness of the universal intelligence that exists within everybody. And so they could see that we were losing contact with that universal awareness within us. And so they wrote down all these different areas of life: Ayurveda, the science of health, yoga, Vedic astrology, how to build your home in accord with the laws of nature, called Sthapatya Veda, many, many different fields of life. So that this would act as a guidance to help people through these more difficult times.
Let me back up for a second. So this darkness that we were coming into, mm-hmm. Are we talking about the cycle of ages, I think it's called?
I think it figures into the cycle of ages.
So that they saw us leaving that
that
smart phase.
Yeah, well, it was a phase that was in greater attunement with natural law. So within us, it's understood that we have all the laws of nature, all the governing principles of life lively within our awareness. But as we went into this time, like referred to it as Kali Yuga, others have referred to it as the Iron Age, awareness became more dense and more focused on the strictly material. And so we lost that very refined awareness of how to function in accord with natural law. And when we function in accord with natural law, our desires are fulfilled and we don't suffer. When we don't, when we violate natural law, then we naturally suffer.
So all these different areas were just basics that human beings, spiritual beings live by, and then we entered into this dark phase. Why? It's probably a ridiculous question, but it happened in the Himalayas and in India. Were they the only people who had this knowledge? I mean, we don't seem to have that hand-me-down kind of knowledge. We see a little bit of it, but not as deeply structured in Central South America.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't see it in Europe, Africa, as far as I'm aware of, the Middle East. What made them so wise, so to speak?
Probably the isolation of those mountains. Is that it's a very refined atmosphere up there, very isolated, and therefore somewhat immune to corrupting influences. And so they were able to maintain this knowledge. And of course it filtered down into India, and India became the repository of this Vedic wisdom. And so, sure, there's a lot of knowledge that's been lost over time, but the essence still remains, and these techniques for re-identifying with this infinite, immortal place within us still remain. The meditation techniques, the ceremonies, many things, the whole knowledge of yoga is still remains to one degree or another, because I don't think Mother Nature will ever allow the light of life to be extinguished. And so even in dark times, there'll be places that maintain the potential of life, the knowledge of how to realize our full potential. So nature will never let the light go out. So let me back this up just a little bit. You had this interest in astrology. You got interested in meditation. So, the meditation brought you to the Vedic astrology? Yeah, when I was in the monastery, I started studying Vedic astrology, just as I started studying Ayurveda. And eventually that led me to an association with a world-renowned Ayurvedic doctor named Dr. Sunil Joshi, and I helped him write his book on Ayurveda and the purificatory methods of Ayurveda called Panchakarma. So I learned a great deal of about Ayurveda in that process. And so I explored many different aspects of this Vedic wisdom in my association with the transcendental meditation and subsequent exposures. So it was just a natural offshoot to go more deeply into these fields of life, these areas of knowledge. Was it? We were sitting here talking beforehand, and you did a chart on me, and we can get into that. Uh-huh. Did you have that kind of epiphany experience when you first started with it, to just like, wow, this thing is really amazing? Well, one of the things that really convinced me was the planetary time periods that govern each of us. Now, we're born into a particular time period, and we sequence through a particular set of periods. And these time periods, these planetary time periods, really dominate who we are. In other words, a lot of our experiences fructify in a particular time associated with that planet. So each planet, I prefer to look at the planets rather than these orbiting hunks of rock out in the sky. I prefer to see them within ourselves, because in the Vedic understanding, the macrocosm exists within the microcosm. So this infinitude of reality out here, they say, actually exists within us.
So we're a smaller version of something larger.
That's right. And intimately connected when we develop that awareness of that. And so the planets are really just styles or qualities of intelligence within us. There's a Jupiterian style of intelligence which is oriented towards growth and expansion, spirituality, wisdom, higher knowledge, and good fortune. There's a Venusian style of intelligence which gives us the ability for artistry, for love, for harmony, for our sense of beauty and appreciation.
How does that work? I am seeing a doctor of Oriental medicine who does pulse readings. Mm-hmm. My understanding is that there are 10 meridians that run through the body, and he reads that each meridian is tied into a gland or an organ. Mm-hmm. Are the planets then connected to one of these meridians, so to speak? How do they impact us?
Well, it's a different system. It's a Chinese system that I haven't studied, so I don't know the interrelationships.
Yeah, I'm just throwing that as an example.
In Ayurveda, there are these three principal activating dynamics called the doshas that are based on the 5 elements, just like in Chinese medicine. Mm-hmm. And so each planet is associated with one or more of those activating intelligences.
You want to list the 5 elements for people?
Well, it starts with the most subtle, and therefore it acts as the matrix for the other 4. But what they call ether in Sanskrit is called akasha, or space.
Yes.
So that acts as the matrix for the other ones. So then it goes air or wind, or the motion principle, fire, the metabolic principle, water, the liquidity principle, and earth, the binding and structuring principle.
And so just keep rolling with that.
Okay.
How do we tie in all the
for
planets
instance,
to that?
Saturn is a planet that's associated with the movement principle, the drying principle. And so wherever Saturn sits or aspects, there is going to be some what they call vata. Vata is that principle of motion and drying. There'll also be a drying influence, a separating influence, because that's what dryness does, is it separates. And so if a clod of earth gets really dry, then it turns into dust. Yeah.
Okay.
And so we can see...
so if I get really dry, what does that mean in terms of a human? I mean, I'm not going to fall apart. So
okay.
How would that...
So that's where the vata principle, this main dynamic of movement and drying, takes place. And so what happens is you'll get stiffer in your joints, in your muscles, because they're not as lubricated.
Okay.
It'll separate you from certain mental faculties. As you get older, you go into the vata time of life. And so as vata dominates, then it separates you from your memory. It'll separate you from this fluidity that you had as a youth.
So that's a natural aging process for everybody, or
yes, but some people
more than others.
It will be more predominant.
Is it counteractable?
Yes. So that's where the knowledge of Ayurveda comes in, is that it gives all these principles. They understand that all disease is due to an imbalance in either the motion principle, vata, the metabolic principle, pitta, or the liquidity and cohesion principle, which is kapha. And so what they do is they address the disease at its source. And they can actually pick up your pulse and read a disease that will manifest 20 or 30 years from now if it's not balanced. Okay, so the doctor will see an imbalance in the vata pulse that manifests in a particular area of the body. It may be the joints. And he will tell the client, okay, if you don't take certain measures, this will wind up as arthritis or immobility in some way.
So that sounds a lot like what I was just talking about. Are you talking about one pulse or multiple pulses?
There are multiple pulses.
And how many are there in Ayurvedic practice?
Well, they actually categorize 108 different pulses. And it takes a Vaidya, that's what an Ayurvedic doctor is called, many years to master all those pulses. And they can do remarkable things when they feel your pulse and identify many different things that are out of balance.
Let's bounce around here a bit.
Okay.
When you talk about influences of the planets, is there a karmic connection to this influence?
Most definitely.
Is that an implication that as a soul I've spent time on that planet, that's the influence on me for this particular go-round?
Well, the understanding is that you bring in certain life experiences. There are certain things that you came in to work on, ultimately to perfect your relationship with the totality. Whatever you want to call that, the divine, universal intelligence, the true self.
So then it's which comes first, the chicken or the egg? I mean, am I coming in to deal with something so I'm given Saturn in a particular place? Or did I spend time on Saturn and I come in and deal with it?
No, I don't think it's that you spent time on Saturn, the planet, but you choose, in conjunction with higher guidance, what you want to work on in this life. So we call it a suitcase of karma. It's called Prarabdha karma, as opposed to Sanchita karma, which is the whole mass of karma. And let me define karma. Karma is the result of actions. And people think of karma only as bad karma. And that's totally incorrect. And I even do not use the term bad karma because it's just the result of experience.
Cause and
effect. So the planets show what, in terms of positive karma, what gifts, what talents, what opportunities you are coming in to experience and win. And it also shows certain lessons that you haven't perfected from this long course of human evolution. And so because you haven't really mastered these lessons, they're a little difficult. And so there's certain planets that will tend to bring back these lessons that are a little difficult, and some planets that will tend to evidence more the gifts and talents.
The reason I said spending time on the planet, I'm a big believer in Edgar Cayce. Mm-hmm. And one of the things when he discusses astrology is he talks about the sojourn on the planets, that we come in reflecting where we've been and what we learned, and now we get the chance to put it into use in the physical plane of existence that we had. So that's why I threw that question out there.
I can't comment on that because I just don't know.
Okay, yeah, but that was the source of the question. I didn't want you to think I was just playing around or anything. Because to me, when I was looking over the notes that we did for the show and read the things that you sent me both on yourself and on the Vedic Astrology, that was the first thing that popped off. I even wrote in the margin here about sojourns. That's what he called them. Uh-huh. But let's forget that. Let's start putting this into a little bit more detail. Let's use me. So
Okay.
you've got a chart here of me.
So this is Reverend Phil's chart here. And the way we look at this is it goes counterclockwise from the first house. Here you'll see the houses and the borders. First, second, third, fourth, and so on. And the houses...
Let me interrupt just for a second. Before we even get into me, people who are now seeing this with the camera, they're used to seeing a circular chart. This is not. This is squared diamonds. Can you explain why the difference?
The circular chart is something that's used primarily in Western astrology. And there's quite a bit of difference between Western astrology and Vedic astrology. The chart style is the least of the difference. Vedic astrology looks at what was actually in the sky at the time of birth. It's called the sidereal system, whereas Western astrology fixed that time around 285 AD. They fixed the first day of spring at 1 degree of Aries. But due to something called the precession of the equinoxes, which is a long-term wobble of the Earth on its axis, that actually goes back into Pisces. So we're actually, the first day of spring, according to the Vedic system, is actually around 6 or 7 degrees of Pisces. Okay, and it'll continue to happen for about 25,600 years until we get back around
to the same position.
Yes.
That's that cycle of ages.
Yes.
Yes.
So it's called the precession of the equinoxes.
All our discussions, you've mentioned planets. You and I have talked a little bit. Talked about houses. No constellations?
There are constellations.
Okay.
In the Vedic system, they're called nakshatras. And there's 27 of them. And they actually predated the 12 signs. Okay, so in the sky is divided up in both Eastern and Western astrology in terms of 12 signs. We call them constellations.
Okay.
But there's a different configuration of constellations which have to do with the fixed stars, like Aldebaran and Spica and so on. And these form 27 divisions in the sky called nakshatras, and they are very important. They give a very defined personality to each of the planets.
So a while back, there was a big to-do in the news about this 13th sign. So what you're saying is then, if I interpret it right, is that's nothing new. That's part of the 27?
Yeah, that's right.
So it's already been accounted for, and there's nothing new about having it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
let's dissect me.
Okay. So, and let me just say that there's also one of the significant differences is this system of planetary periods called the Dasha system. And these planetary periods, you'll start in a different planetary period for each person. Will start in a different planetary period, but then they'll sequence through the same order of planets. And so wherever that planet sits, say, for instance, you're currently in Mercury. Mercury sits in the 10th house. And as I said, these houses are the fields of life that we can engage in. The first house is the most important because it's who we are. It's our character, our personality, our virtues, our manner of self-expression. It's our body, our appearance, everything about us is seen from the first house.
And there are 12 houses.
And there are 12 houses.
Can you give a quick rundown of 1 through 12, what they stand for?
Well, it won't be quick, but just for instance, we'll start with Aries, the first of the signs. Because it's the first, it's very outgoing, it goes for what it wants, it's very independent, very pioneering in its orientation. When we get to Taurus, it's more fixed. It's a very productive sign. It's and of course one of the things about these signs in Vedic astrology is very important who owns the sign.
What does that mean?
Well, these signs, each sign acts the most like a particular planet. And so it's ascribed ownership. That planet is ascribed ownership of that sign. So Taurus is owned by Venus. And it also owns your first house. And so Venus becomes very important in your chart. Because the first house, this number 7, is Libra. And so, so both Taurus and Libra will act most like Venus. Okay, and so we really, as we go into Vedic astrology further and start to look at unions of planets called yogas, we look at ownership as being very important. And so that's another, the Western system does that too, but it's a little bit more emphasized in Vedic astrology.
So let's put this in more, maybe the simplest way to put it in terms is to just use me again.
Okay.
What you just said, put it into
Okay.
full terms.
So we see that your ascendant is Libra. Libra wants balance. It's very idealistic.
That's my rising sign.
It's your rising sign. And in Vedic astrology, when you're asked for your sign, they're not asking for your sun sign. They're asking for your rising sign, the ascendant sign.
Why?
Because they feel like that's a much broader, more complete description of the self than the sun. So in Western astrology, when they ask for
They
your...
emphasize the sun.
Yeah, they ask for your sun sign.
Fascinating.
And, yeah. So Libras have an ideal, and they will sometimes go to extremes to fulfill that ideal. And they can actually use the realm of politics or spirituality or love to find that ideal that they're looking for. And sometimes they'll create imbalance because one of the ways that Librans learn is to the swing of the pendulum.
So you say create imbalance. If I am motivated by love, and I'm a child who's perceiving I don't have love or I'm not getting love, that would create that imbalance?
Well, it's just the way that you go about doing it that can create the imbalance.
So negative attention is better than no attention
it could
all.
be, yeah. Or,
okay.
Or you can do it through politics, through religion, and it may have you learning by going to extremes. But that's not all the qualities of Librans.
Okay.
So I don't want to focus on that. But we also look at where Venus sits, because Venus is the owner of Libra, and Venus becomes the lord of the chart. Whoever owns the first house becomes the lord of the chart. And Venus sits in the 11th house of long-term goals and desires, your dreams and aspirations. So this is going to be a strong motivating force for you. It's also the house of opportunities, of gain, of pleasure. It's a house of friends and groups and clubs and societies. So these are going to figure very prominently into the themes of your life, wherever the owner of the chart sits.
Would they figure into my life in a negative sense as opposed to like seeking them out, but as opposed to that, let's say, running away from them?
It can. It depends on how Venus, its strength or weakness. Venus sits in a sign of Leo, and it doesn't normally like to sit in Leo. Okay, so there's going to be some challenge there, and we also see that there's going to be some hard lessons for you to learn in this regard. In the realm of love, of relationships, because it sits with Saturn, And Saturn is a planet that's ascribed the duty of bringing back some of your toughest lessons to learn. And so, but rather than see Saturn as something bad, it's just showing you areas of real difficulty and is demanding that you take more personal responsibility, that you're more diligent and focused in learning these lessons, and that you're more humble.
And there's a someplace in the chart that says what the lessons are?
Everything in the chart says that.
Okay.
See, each one of these houses is the field of life. And we look at not only where the planet sits, but what house it influences by aspect. So aspect, all planets throw an aspect directly opposite them. But some planets like Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars throw two additional aspects. And so they will influence that particular area of life. For instance, Jupiter will aspect 5 away from itself, and so it will aspect the 8th house of mysticism, alternative healing, energetic healing, ancient skill-based traditions, and it also aspects the 12th house of one of the indicators is self-realization.
They go hand in hand almost.
Yeah.
So the 8th house about energetic healing, that would then make me both prone to practice it and seek it out for my own healing?
Yes. Plus you've got one of your luminaries, your moon, in the 8th house. And what I oftentimes see with the moon or Jupiter sitting in or influencing the 8th house is counseling.
Okay.
Okay. And I understand that's what you do. And now the 8th house, one of the reasons for this is not just the house of deep psychology. It's the toughest house in the chart. It's the house of unconsciousness and the worst of human behavior and motivations. It's the house of death and transformation. So what are you dying to? You're dying to all these
Dying
old...
to the ego.
Yeah, you're dying to the ego, to the ways that your ego makes you suffer.
Yes.
And you're being reborn into a closer association with the mystery of life. Okay? And so in order, it's like going through the river Styx, that ancient myth, is that you have to go through the darkness to get to the light. And in order to do that, it's a transformational process. So the 8th house is a highly transformational house. And so you've got your planet of emotions, of how you experience life in the 8th house.
This is so fascinating. And just for anybody watching, all I provided you with was my time of birth and my location. Mm-hmm. So minimal amount of, it's not like fitting it because he knows me. This is amazing. Let's go back on this 8th house. This transformation you're talking about, it's not just one, it's multiples. It's a constant transformation. That's how I view my life.
Well, your moon is always there for life. This is the pattern of the birth karma associated with this intelligence of nurturing, of mother, of how you experience the world, of your emotions, of your feeling level, your feelings about life. And so it's in perhaps the toughest house in the chart. And so the transformation is going to tend to be an emotionally based transformation, and it's going to happen through very difficult things: change, catalysis, upheaval. The 8th house is a house of addictions, of manipulation. As I said, the worst of the human behavior.
So, and people watching know this, I'm a recovering drug addict. Mm-hmm. So yes, and I didn't do drugs because it was a happy time in my life. Mm-hmm. So yes, I was reacting to emotion. The pain, of not being loved, of not being okay, and that may have just been a perception. Part of it may have been real, part of it may not have been real. The transformation now, as I see myself, and I don't know if that bears out with the chart, is interesting, is that it's more spiritual. Emotions take a back seat.
I don't tend to separate emotions from spirituality. My definition of spirituality is anything that enlivens the spirit, that aliveness within us, that freedom, that joy, that love, which is all innate to the human experience, but gets covered over by our wounds, our pain, and it isn't allowed to express itself naturally. And so spirituality is anything that actually allows that transformation from pain to the experience of freedom.
In that sense, yes. I mean, in that sense, I've been married 3 times. This is my 3rd marriage, and I finally got it right. And you're right. I was incapable of loving. Mm-hmm. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know how to deal with it. Now I do, mm-hmm. and I enjoy it so much. So in that sense, yes. When I said I wasn't, the way I deal with the rest of the world is really different than the way I deal with my wife and I in the relationship we have in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm. Well, marriage is a training ground for how you then open up to all of life. But one thing that's really important to understand, that even the tough things in the chart, people are not a slave to those indications.
We have free will.
Yeah, and that's what the Vedic astrology encourages you. It will show the gifts and the talents, and it'll also show the challenges, and hopefully with a good Vedic astrologer, how to meet those challenges and overcome them, because that's what life is about, is how to get back to our natural state of joy.
Before we get into overcoming, I want to go back on 2 other things. I got 2 questions. Can you, through this process, like retrograde me back and see past lives and where I created karma?
Well, it's not necessary.
Okay.
From my perspective, it's, you brought the suitcase in.
Okay.
And this is what the contents are. And this is how you work with the contents and how to evolve yourself back to this intimate relationship with the divine within you.
And then the second question becomes, can you do charts for like a couple and show the overlap and work it as, showing what they are doing and what they're not doing together?
Yeah, you can look at the compatibilities. You can look at inclinations or disinclinations towards marriage. You can see where a person tends to get married out of passion.
My first 2 wives. When I studied a little bit of Western astrology for a while. Both of my first and my second wife were Sagittarius. And my understanding was, especially with my second wife, but Sag, there was a sun-moon opposition that created that deep attraction. And with my second wife, there was the mutual sun-moon oppositions. Is that something that, because in the circular chart you have the 180-degree opposites. Is that something that happens?
Yes.
It does.
But it's not as emphasized.
Okay.
In Vedic astrology. What we tend to do is look at the synastries between the first house, your mutual first houses, synastries between your sons, which is the expression of radiance of life, that dynamism, and also a sense of spirituality. We look at your moons, your emotional compatibility. We look at Venus, your 2 Venuses, and that's your sensual and sexual compatibility. We look at the compatibility between other planets, but those are the ones that we really focus on.
So let's go back to overcoming.
Mm-hmm.
So we identify the obstacles in the chart. The chart then, by identifying the obstacles, is that how we identify how to overcome it, or does the chart separately tell us what to do to overcome it?
Well, certainly one of the things that you look at is your strengths. I mean, Vedic astrology is not about just looking at your weaknesses or your challenges. And so you start off with your best foot. You start off with your strengths and build on that. And then we also have to look at the time periods, the specific time periods for where a particular challenging planetary configuration will dominate. And one of the things, there are many ways to deal with that, to mitigate the challenges. One is, of course, being conscious of that and consciously doing that which will offset these negative habit patterns. One of the really powerful way is through planetary pujas. Pujas are have been prescribed since ancient time, thousands and thousands of years, and they're by the Vedic seers for alleviating difficult karma. And they're ceremonies, very ritualized ceremonies, that are done by Vedic priests in India that actually address the difficult karmic patterns and lighten them up. So that one, they don't hit you as hard, and two, that you can actually learn from these experiences and ultimately transcend them in the way that you've really learned your lesson and now you can move on.
So can we just go through a list of what my strengths and what my obstacles are from the chart?
Yeah.
Okay,
let's start with the sun.
Okay.
The sun is very strong because it sits in the house, the 10th house, where it likes to sit the most. And so it receives strength by being in that position. Sun is the planet of authority, of power, of centrality. This is who you are at your deepest core. And it is ultimately the planet of self-realization. And so...
Self-realization in the yogic guru sense.
Yes. And,
okay.
Any degrees to that ultimate degree, we can say that sun functions in that principle. It directs you inward to the core of your being. And it's also sits in a friend sign of Cancer. And so sun will manifest to a certain degree through the principles of Cancer, which of course is owned by the moon. And so you're going to take a more nurturing attitude towards how you present yourself to the world. Because the 10th house is the noonday sun. This is where the world sees you the most. And because it's the chief power house and the chief worldly houses, all these diamonds are the worldly houses. They're the pillars of the chart. And that's why they're displayed as diamonds, larger than the others. You will have an impact on the world in a way that's particularly solar. So guiding, protecting, that's the sun. But through Cancer is going to be, you'll see the world as your family.
Interesting,
yeah.
Fascinating.
And then it sits with Mercury, and Mercury is the planet of the intellect, of intelligence, of that discriminatory intelligence. Whereas Moon is the feeling intelligence. And your moon is strong because it's exalted in Taurus. So that's a good thing. Both your sun and moon are strong, and it's good to have your luminaries strong. Now, the position of the moon shows a little bit more challenge, but you've used that challenge, and you've overcome that challenge, and now you've taken your flaws, your greatest stumbling blocks, and turned them into your greatest gift, and you use that in your profession.
So, when you talked about that self-realization, that struck a chord, because I spent a good part of my life, there's a phrase in 12-step, trying to fix what's broken inside of us with something outside of us, and that's insane.
Yeah.
And that's what I did, whether it was, relationships, whether it was drugs, whether it was money, whether it was possessions, whether it was sex, whatever it was always looking outside of me to find some way to fix me.
Mm-hmm.
And then got to that place where it all fell apart. It couldn't possibly work. I didn't know that until I got to the end of that path.
Thank goodness that it fell apart.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah.
And then I started this journey with lack of trust, with no real faith, no belief, and got guided inward, and got continually to guide inward. And you're right about being a counselor and drawing upon those experiences. One of the things I tell my clients when I'm working with them is, my experience, that I got through this, you can get through this, whatever this is.
Mm-hmm.
And that also that in the context of spirituality, that we are divinely loved, that I did not get written off and said, Phil, fraternity, go sit in the corner with a dunce cap.
Yeah.
I was given the opportunity, in spite of my best actions and thinking, to turn it around.
Yeah. And that's what the chart shows. It shows the opportunities. It shows the gifts. It shows how you can transform difficult, hard-to-learn lessons into your greatest gift. And my sense is that that's what one of the tricks of spirit is, to send us through these learning experiences that are very difficult, and then when we're able to transform them, they become our gift. And so people listen to you because they know that you've walked a mile in their moccasins, you've been through the hard road, and you've transformed it. And there's a lot in this chart that shows that Mercury, getting back to Mercury is the planet of communication, of delivering a message.
Which is my TV show, which was my radio show.
That's right.
Prior to this.
And it sits in the house of greatest exposure to the world, the house of renown. So it shows that you are going to be using this particular intelligence of communicating, of speech, of giving voice to things in your profession. And that's what you do. You're always communicating a message.
Yes.
Or allowing other people to communicating a message.
I mean, I call myself a counselor, but I really consider myself a teacher. Mm-hmm. And that through the teaching is the healing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you've got Jupiter, the planet of teachership, aspecting the house of career, aspecting that Sun and Mercury. And so it's going to impart that wisdom. Now, it's retrograde, which makes it stronger in the Vedic system, but it's also debilitated. And in other words, it sits in a sign that it least likes to sit in. And so what oftentimes happens with this is that there's inherent weakness in that intelligence, and very often you take extra measures. Like the planet of athletics is Mars, and Michael Jordan has a debilitated Mars. And he took extra efforts, went to extraordinary lengths to become who he was. And so that's what I oftentimes see with a debilitated or weak planet.
I got to cut away. I got to make a couple of announcements. We're going to come back, and I don't know, I'll throw it open to you. What else is in my chart we need to just use as a lesson? Wow, what an experience. Welcome, everybody. I'm kind of blown away by this whole thing. So let me get my act together here for a second. You are part of this show. This is called Public Access Television, and that means the public is accessing us, and we are here to serve you. So I'd love to hear from you, things that you'd like clarification on in this show or any show. Maybe you'd like to hear me do a show on a particular topic that hasn't been covered here. Maybe you want to do a show with me. You think you have an expertise that is something you'd like to share with people, and it falls into the context of this show. In any case, contact me. I'd love to hear from you. And as you've heard, we've talked, Jonathan and I am a counselor. I do spiritual counseling. Like I said, I really believe that education and the sharing of knowledge and experience is what does the real healing through the spirit. So I don't believe in traditional talk therapy per se that asks us to solve our problems with the same instrument that creates it, and that's not going to work for the most part. So if you've heard something that resonates with you, if you have a problem and you'd like to deal with it on a spiritual level, contact me. My services are on donation basis, so money is never an issue. It's not any one person's job to take care of me. Spirit takes care of me. Next week, we're going to have Mark Swinney on. He is a Christian Science practitioner. We're going to talk about Jesus' teachings and how to use them to heal ourselves. And it should be a most interesting show. So tune in again next week. So we've got about 5, maybe 6 minutes left. What else jumps out on the chart? Am I picking up something I'd said tied into something you saw on the chart just now? Or
well, we look at the Lord of the chart, Venus, and see that it's sitting with Saturn. And so it shows that there's you're in this life to learn some difficult lessons around the manifestation of your personality, yourself, because that's what the Lord of your chart indicates. But we also see that there's a lot of support. You have Ketu, the south node of the moon, in the 12th house. Ketu is called the moksha planet. Moksha is a Sanskrit term for liberation or self-realization. It's a planet that pulls back and discriminates truth from unreality. And so it's the moksha planet in the chief moksha house. And so it shows a strong inclination towards using that thing to blow through the illusion of life, to actually discern the real from the unreal.
So by living in the unreal, I get to discern that it doesn't work and get into the real?
You become dissatisfied.
Yeah.
And so that dissatisfaction causes you to then look for what's real and lasting. And so Vedic astrology it has practical benefits for addressing different aspects of life, whether it's relationships, career, your physical health, but ultimately its purpose is to get you on to a path of knowing yourself more clearly. So that spirituality, that spirit, accessing that spirit within.
And that's been the path. That just when I finally got to the place I couldn't fix myself from without, I had to start looking within.
Spirit is the source, the course, and the goal of life. And
yes.
And you can only avoid spirit for just so long. There's always this impulse from deep within wanting to bring you back into harmony with life. And
but I have free will, so I could avoid that. Does the chart indicate the intensity and the use of free will? Or is that outside of the purview of the chart?
It's how you choose to use these planetary intelligences.
So the gifts, the power, and I get to choose what do I walk towards the light or I walk away from it.
Yeah. And so it really is a matter of soul evolution, is how often you choose for positive experiences. Sometimes we as souls learn our lessons through our mistakes, through
I mean, there's another way besides that?
through the
Now
school
you tell me.
hard knocks. But even, a highly evolved soul can come into some very difficult situations, but they'll learn those lessons and they'll turn it around. And because they're highly evolved, there's less focus on the self and more focus on giving back.
You say that, it's interesting. A while back, I read it a long time ago, and almost like reading it anew, the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna.
Yeah.
And when you talk about the adversarial conditions of the end of him dying of cancer and how he dealt with that was just so incredible. We get these gifts, and what do I do with them?
Mm-hmm.
Do I let them overpower me? Do I let them take me off my path? Or do I use them as a lesson and use them as a teaching tool?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what, everything in the chart is opportunity. Some opportunities are construed more positively. Some are construed as more of a challenge. But it's all opportunities to grow into a greater unity with the true self, with our divine self, and with all of life. That's the ultimate purpose of Vedic astrology.
It's beautiful. We're starting to run down.
All right.
Jonathan, thank you so much. So they've been flashing your contact information on the screen. I don't know how anybody watching the show cannot be impressed. This is incredible. Call him, make an appointment, let him help you understand what's going on and show you what to do about it.
Well, I really enjoyed this, Phil.
So did I.
Great questions.
Can't wait to watch the DVD when I get it. In any case, again, Jonathan, thank you so much.
Thank you, Phil.
I want to thank you all for watching. You've been watching Words of the Prophets. I'm Reverend Phil, my guest Jonathan Cruz, and we've been talking about Vedic astrology. And we're going to get more into, we've done a little bit of this, we're going to try to get more into this a little bit down the road, just the whole Vedic concept and Ayurveda concept. Anyway, the message is, you have choice, you have power. What do you want to do with it? You can let things overwhelm you, or you can choose to make something out of them. Your job, I believe, is not to let God in, it's to let God out. So walk in love and light, and we'll see you again next week. Blessings to you all. I'm Reverend Phil, and I've been your host for Words of the Prophets. Thank you for tuning in. Please join me again next week, same time, same channel, for more Words of the Prophets.